Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Sustainable Farming Incentive virtual event. I'll just give everybody a couple of minutes to join. I can see there's a few people just still trying to get into the meeting, so please bear with us. I'll just give them a couple of moments to join and then we'll begin. Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you to those of you who've joined us. We'll begin shortly. We're just waiting for everybody to come into the meeting. Hello, good evening, everybody. For those of you that's just joined, welcome along to the Sustainable Farming Incentive Pilot virtual event this evening. So the event today, the meeting that we've got today, is basically just to provide the information that we did when we had our face-to-face events, and I'll tell you a little bit about those in the agenda. But today what we'd like to do is I'm just going to give you a short welcome and an overview of what we're going to do. And then we're going to hear from Sam in my team, who's going to give you an update on the pilot, how is it going, and what we are, and how the impact of that learning, how we are using it to help design our new schemes and what that looks like. Then we're going to pause and we're going to hear from two guest speakers, Martin Lyons and Kitty. Kitty is a pilot participant and is going to tell you a little bit about her pilot experience. We're going to pause there and we'll have 20 minutes for a short Q question and answer session, so we can answer any of your questions that you've got on the back of the presentations that you've heard this morning. And then what we're going to do for the final part of the agenda is put you into some breakout groups. So what we've heard when we've had our face-to-face events, that you're really keen to hear from people, from other farmers in the pilot in your area. So what we're going to do is pop you into some discussion groups, and we'll let you know how to do that later on in the agenda, so you can meet some farmers that's based locally to you and you can hear from them. So for those of you that don't know me, haven't met me face to face, my name is Louise Maguire and I lead the test trials team and the Sustainable Farming Incentive Pilot team. And what we do is gather all the learning from the tests and trials and the pilot and put it back into policy teams to help them deliver the new environmental land management schemes. So what are we trying to do today with the session? We want to give you the opportunity to experience our recent face-to-face events and to give you the opportunity to hear some of the presentations that were provided. We want to update you on the progress of the pilot so far, what's been happening, what the learning that we've gathered already, and how that learning has helped shape where we're going, particularly with the live Sustainable Farming Incentive Scheme that's been live since June. We're going to hear from guest speakers I've already outlined, and we're really excited for you to hear from them, because that was one of the parts that you really enjoyed on our face-to-face sessions. And then, as I said at the top, an opportunity for you to meet other farmers in the pilot, but we will tell you a little bit more about how that will work when we get to that part in the agenda. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview of what we've been doing in our face-to-face events. So you may know that we've run 6 face-to-face events, ranging right the way from the southeast right the way to the northwest, that has been attended by over 300 pilot farmers, and it was great to meet all of you at those meetings and to hear from you face to face about your experience of being in the pilot. And what we heard is you really enjoyed these events. You enjoyed hearing from us, but you have also enjoyed meeting each other that's in the pilot and sharing your experience to date. And the map just gives you an overview of the location of the face-to-face events. So what did we hear from those events? So we heard that you enjoy being in the pilot and you appreciate the opportunity to help shape the new schemes. But there is some uncertainty, what we heard, particularly around the learning journal and how to engage with the pilot if you have poor internet and IT. So I will pick up some of those points at the end of my presentation. So what else did we hear? So we heard about monitoring and site visits. So the site visit started in June for the pilot, and we've got around 120 visits that are taking place during year one of the pilot. So during our face-to-face events, we heard from some farmers who had been visited. They were apprehensive and unsure of how it would go, but once they'd had the visit, they felt generally it was a positive experience. And what we heard, that RPA field officers were supportive and you felt that they were competent. But you would still like some reassurance following the visit that you know you were on the right track. So we also heard about the capital offer that sits alongside the agreements that we have in the pilot. We heard that that could be expanded to cover more items to support the implementation of the standards. And we also heard that you felt it was inflexible, that you can only apply once and that your fee for getting it wrong and that payment rates were insufficient. So we heard a lot about the standards delivery and how it was going for you. And this is a summary of some of the findings that what we heard from you. So in terms of the arable and horticultural land standard and the low no input grass standard, those generated the most discussions across the events. And what we heard was the guidance could be clearer, often with clearer language, simpler language in terms of what you're expected to do. And it would help if there were specific examples in there for the actions that were in the standards to say, we would see if you did this, this is how you would meet the action in that standard. We heard that some of you felt the standards work better for those with larger fields, but you enjoyed the flexibility that the standards had, but it can cause some uncertainty around the compliance and making sure that you're doing the right thing. So the other thing that we heard is it's often, you're often doing much of the actions anyway, and you are happy to be part of the pilot and happy to be paid for it and rewarded for the environmental delivery that you're already doing. And in some cases, the standards did require a bit of shift in your management approach, but you were generally happy to have a go and and try and achieve the outcomes of the standards. Some other common themes that we heard in terms of the standards was uncertainty around stacking rules. And this was in particular reference to standards that had buffers in them. So for example, the water body buffering standard and the hedgerow standard, and what management and grazing and access is allowed in them. You felt that we could be clearer about the standards themselves and what outcomes we were hoping to achieve by undertaking each of the standards. And you felt if we were clear on we're doing this to achieve this environmental outcome or this outcome, it would enable you to achieve the outcomes better. We've also heard about regional variations, and the standards don't account very well for some of the regional variations, particularly in hedge types, in local tree and grass species. So that's, again, some of the insights that we've took back to policy teams. And we also heard in terms of advice and the guidance that you're seeking, that some of the actions require the hiring of professionals. So for example, woodland felling and soils assessment, which can sometimes make the standard less financially appealing because you're having to pay out that funding to go and get to hire that professional to come in to help you deliver that standard. And then we heard about the extreme weather conditions impeding your delivery and what we were doing around this. And obviously, hopefully you've seen the communication that's come out, but that was really helpful to get your insight in terms of how that's going. So some of the things that I said I would address. So we did hear some confusion on the learning journal and what you were supposed to be doing and putting in your learning journal. But what we've pointed to is that we do have templates and a little bit of guidance on the journal and what the type of things that you can put in your journal. Essentially, it is up to you. And it's up to you how you do it. We know some people are keeping a handwritten diary, some people are doing it on the computer. But we have got some templates if you'd find it easily to follow a template, and we'll share the link to the SharePoint site with you again, so you can have a look at those templates for the learning journal and the guidance that sits alongside that. We've also heard about land management plans and the templates, and do we have a template for those? So again, we'll share the link. We do have 3 for you to choose from, but again, as with the learning journal, you are free to use your own template. These are just examples and things you could put in. So we hope you find that guidance useful, and if you do think there's anything missing, please, or you're still confused, please do email us. So don't forget, depending on your agreement start date, you will have your annual declaration to complete to say that you have completed the actions in your agreement. And you will also have, if you seeking to make any amendments, so for example, if you're looking to increase some of the ambition levels in your agreement, you can do that through the amendment window. So please don't forget that. And please do get involved in our future workshops, because as you'll hear from Sam in a moment, they are really helping shape where we go and what we do. I just wanted to mention a few things before I move on to Sam. I just wanted to say thank you, one, for taking the time this evening and joining us and hearing from us and meeting each other, and for participating in the pilot. If it wasn't for you, we wouldn't have this learning that we are generating to help develop our new schemes. The other thing I wanted to mention is just about the service. So hopefully this Zoom will continue as normal. We have heard today, unfortunately, that they are doing DEFRA are doing some work on our computer system, which may mean that the Zoom may drop out. Hopefully it won't. If it does, we will restart it as quickly as possible to enable you to rejoin, but hopefully that won't impact on us. And I'm sorry we weren't aware of that until today. So I'll hand you over to Sam, and then we're going to hear from Martin and Kitty. And I just wanted to say we do have a variety of different farms in the pilot, ranging from small to larger farms that we've got. So today isn't representative of the speakers that we've got, but we do have a variety of different farms that are covered and farm sizes in the pilot. Sam, if I can bring you in and you can talk about what we've heard in terms of the learning that we've had and how we've used it.
Thanks, Louise, and evening, everybody. Really good to see so many of you here and some familiar faces from the different activities we've been doing. As Louise said, I work within Louise's team particularly in the sort of the engagement side, so getting involved in helping get a lot of the learning activities we're doing out to you all. So it's good to be here this evening. And what we want to do is just give you a bit of an update on the pilot itself, because obviously over the last year or so, we've gone through quite a process, or 18 months really, from the expressions of interest that started in March last year, then through to the application process and starting to set agreements live in November last year. And that process went on. I think we ended up setting our last agreement live in around June this year. So it's been a real learning curve for us, right from the outset. But we're now sort of settled in the pilot. We've gone through the 1 year stage and starting to deal with annual declarations and moving into the 2nd year for lots of you. So we're set around 850 pilot agreements. So again, there's always a slight bit of fluctuation around that, but that seems to be where we're working with, and that represents just over 2,500 different standards that are being piloted across all of your agreements across the country. And then, as you can see in the slide here, represents some quite considerable figures in terms of assets on the farms that we're piloting. So it's over 3,000 kilometres of hedgerows, and we've got over 640,000 hectares of land in the arable and grassland land standards, and the woodland and the soil standards. So as you can see, it's a fair pilot. So it's giving us a great opportunity to look at lots of different aspects and lots of different ranges of the farms. If we look at agreements and land uses on the next slide, if that comes across, thank you. So as you can see, the map on the right are all our pilot agreements. So as you can see, we sort of stretch right from the Isles of Scilly across to the eastern counties, up through the middle, then right up to the Scottish borders, towards the Scottish border. So you can see we've got a really, really good coverage of pilot agreements across the country. I think the southwest is our biggest region in terms of numbers of pilot agreements, but there's good representation everywhere, which is brilliant for us to be able to draw on all your different sort of circumstances and situations and land types. And as you can see on the left, just a bit of information on the standards. The hedgerow standard is the most popular. And not that far behind is the low and no input grassland standard, and our again, no surprise, but our sort of most frequent land use within the pilot is the grazing livestock. But with cereal and general cropping together, that they're not far behind. So we've got a great range of different agreements, different land types, different farming types as well, which has helped us to really be able to get some good varied learning. So in terms of what we want to learn for the pilot, and again, a little bit like the application process and getting you all on board and setting live, this has evolved over time, and we've oh, if we can just move back onto the next one again. This has evolved over time. Thank you. Thanks, Liz. But there are some sort of key areas that we're really looking to learn from the pilot. So we just wanted to run those through this evening for you, just to give you a bit more of an idea, so you can understand the perspective that we're coming through. So one of our first key areas, the value for money. So will the scheme itself deliver the benefits that we expect it to, and then to what extent our farmers motivated to join and be advocates for the scheme or for the full scheme going forward. So is it sort of working? Is it going to provide us value for money? So the next sort of key area is the scheme design itself. So not just sort of delivery of the standards on the farm, but actually how the standards are put together, how the scheme is put together. How do the payment rates work compared to what we're asking you to do? Is the sort of support, the resources, the guidance that we've got in the scheme, is that sufficient? Does that work? Are there other areas that work really well and other areas that don't work quite so well? And ultimately, is that working for farmers and for the environment together? So that's our scheme design key point. And then the third is, as expected, the sort of operational delivery. So is your experience of sort of going through the application process for your annual declarations, doing amendments, talking to us or talking to the RPA. How's that all worked? What are the good points? What are the bits that we could do with working on a little bit more? And how is that? And our sort of approach to monitoring and compliance, is quite different to our previous schemes. So again, that's a sort of key learning area for us. So all the learning that we do in different ways, and whether that's through workshops or surveys or deep dives or talking to you face to face, all of that is sort of based around these three areas of information that we want to sort of learn from the pilot. Then moving on to sort of how we're learning. So again, this is again, we thought it would be really useful, hopefully, to take you through this so that you've got an idea of what we're doing and how the process is working. So we've got three main areas of our learning, our sort of test, learn and adapt process. And so the initial one is identifying the learning priorities, so back through those three main key areas, looking at the things that we want to learn or we need to, whether that's through our own experiences or questions that have been asked from other sort of policy teams within the Future Farming Countryside programme. So we identify those learning priorities, and they're updated and reviewed depending upon how the schemes are developing or what the current situation is. Then obviously we carry out our different learning activities, and lots of you have been involved in those throughout the time. And then from that, we do quite a bit of work on interpreting those to look to see if they're validating some of those, looking to see if there are regional differences or if it's something across the board, or differences in different types of farms or farming systems, or some of our larger farmers compared to some of the smaller agreements that we've got. And we share that with policy teams, the insights that are coming out from the learning. Sometimes that might be on a very specific basis, if it's about a particular area, or it could be much broader in terms of how things are going generally. And that normally then sparks a bit of a discussion about the pilot and the insights coming out. And quite often we're then in a bit of a cycle, because policy teams will ask us to maybe explore a little bit further, or dig a bit deeper, or do some wider learning and things like that. So sometimes we spend a bit of time in this sort of learning process in the middle, while we're looking at the learning and making sure that we've got as much as our policy teams need. And once we've sort of gone through that process, then obviously that's applied into the different schemes. And sometimes applying that in the schemes is not always necessarily seeing a change, but it could be a decision that's made on how the policies evolve and develop based upon the feedback that we get from yourselves in the pilot, as well as lots of other sort of sources. But it could be that we decide not to progress on something, or to adapt it in a slightly different way because of the impact that or the insights that have come from all of you. But obviously at appropriate times, we then share that learning both with those that have given it to us, such as yourselves, and with the wider sector, so through lots of our organisations as well. And then as we get towards the end of the pilot project as such, we'll be obviously looking at the impact of that. So both the impact in terms of how it's improved our sort of environmental aims and objectives, but also how it's helped us in terms of learning, and has a pilot of this size and this nature worked well? Is it something that we should repeat again for future projects? What are the good parts? What are the bits that haven't worked as well as we thought? So that's our sort of overall process. So it's quite a long process, and I think we're sort of definitely well into the sort of middle part of it now, and taking a great amount of information from you all as you're all delivering your agreements. So just moving on to a few areas of what we have learned. And as I said right at the start, this sort of year has been all about getting on board, getting all of our agreements live, sort of going through some of those initial teething problems and starting to learn and I think, and I'm sure lots of you feel the same, as you sort of get into the agreement, start delivering the actions, working them into your farm businesses. So that's sort of been happening, but we have been learning, and we've been learning right from the start, right back to the application stage. And definitely the feedback that's come from the pilot has had quite an influence already in terms of how we've been shaping the full sort of sustainable farming incentive scheme. In terms of the application process, when we rolled that out to you all, we had lots of feedback about ways it could be improved. The fact that sort of not having an interactive map was quite difficult to know what land you're putting in and what land's what's eligible, not eligible, and then having that sort of window when we had that sort of opening window in sort of September time, and the time in March when you had to apply if you were interested. Those were the key sort of points that came back. So from a live scheme perspective, we've done quite a lot of work on the system. We've had a new platform that's built that shows now sort of eligible land. So when you go to apply for the full scheme, based on your SBI, it will show the land that's eligible for that scheme based upon your, the land that you've got recorded, its land use, and other schemes that you're already in. We do have an interactive map, which has been really, really helpful, and we sort of list land parcels as well to make it a lot easier for you to see the land, the different fields and parcels that you've got. There's an ongoing payment summary, so you can see as you build the your application, the payments that you're likely to get through doing that. And there's quite a bit of additional on-screen guidance that will take you through that process. And as we've managed to simplify a lot of that, what it's also allowed us to do is to get the agreement offers out on a lot more in a sort of more speedy way than we had when we were going through our particular process in the pilot. So it's been a great benefit, and lots of the feedback has come back from pilot applications and that the process that we all went through sort of this time last year. And the other thing that we have changed, which is quite a change from the pilot and also our previous schemes, that there's now a rolling application window. So when the full scheme was launched at the end of June, we did launch it in quite a managed way at the start, just to make sure that as we sort of got going and things went live and things started coming in, that we knew that we could deal with them. And they've been building, and I think every week and every day we're setting new agreements live. But there's no particular there's no particular sort of application window, so you can apply when it suits you, or when it works in with your business, or when you've got sort of time to be able to think about it and put it through. So it's now an ongoing process. So that's how the IT has worked, and what we also do have is a video. We've put together a video of what it's like to apply for the full scheme for those of you that haven't sort of had a go already, because I think there's a number of pilot farmers that are also in the full scheme as well now on different land. Because we're just conscious of time and wanted to spend more time with our farmers talking to you, we're not going to play the video tonight, but what we will do is send around a link to it at the end so that you can watch it yourselves. But do it's only a few minutes, so do take the time to have a look and see how different the process was. Then moving on to some other areas where we've done quite a bit of change for the full scheme, and one of the key points was the guidance. So we'd had some initial feedback about the sort of length and navigation of the guidance in the pilot, and indeed that's something that's continuing to come through as we're sort of delving further into the learning activities with you and the scheme. We're getting lots of feedback about the guidance. And the terms and conditions, I think that was quite a big thing when people were signing up, and although it was new, there was quite a long set of terms and conditions. And as Louise had mentioned, and it sort of certainly comes out in lots of the work we do about the uncertainty about the compliance, and the approach being different in the future, and what that would actually look like. So in terms of the live scheme, from guidance perspective, we've done quite a bit. So you can now download the guidance as a PDF document, or parts of it as well. If you want to download particular sections, you can, so that you can have that, and you can download obviously once you've downloaded it, you can print it, which I know is something that everybody likes to have and ask for. The guidance, we've sort of changed them into how-to guides to try and make it a bit sort of clearer and easier to follow, and within the agreement, it's much more clear to set out what's mandatory. So the agreement itself will have the mandatory requirements, so it's very clear what is mandatory and what is actual guidance. Those are some quite key sort of changes from the pilot that we're working on at the moment. And as we said, with the compliance approach, we're looking to be much more flexible, and this is a big area that we're already learning with all of you but that is being rolled on into the live scheme, and we're using that going forward as well. And then finally, just a bit of an update on the standards themselves. So in terms of the standards, we're running our standards in the pilot, as we've said previously, and we shall continue to run those for the period of the pilot, so we can see how they work and how we get into doing them in year 1, year 2, year 3, etc. But we had quite a lot of feedback about sort of knowing what's mandatory and what's optional within the standards, and the way they're set out in the pilot at the moment, and also the sort of records that you're needed to keep, to make sure that you retain sufficient information if you do have a site visit. or that if you're demonstrating what you've done, and quite a bit of action, a bit of feedback about the actions in some of the standards being quite prescriptive and wanting a bit more flexibility over those, or how to implement those on your farms. So in terms of the live scheme and particularly for the two soil standards that are already in the scheme and running, we're looking at making the standards much less prescriptive and clearer, and only really, as I said before, show the mandatory action. So it's very clear that if it's in the standard itself, then it's required to be done, and anything outside of that is then things that are of an advisory nature. The percentages that we put into the full scheme are based upon the fact that there's a baseline of practice already. So I think when we built the pilot, we based upon what we were looking to get out, but we know lots of you are already doing lots of these type of activities on your farms and within your businesses already. So we built that baseline into into how the standards themselves are shown. And then we've also tried to make more differentiation between the different levels of ambition, which helps us with tolerances, but also flexibility for you, so it's much clearer, for whichever level of ambition that you're in. So some really good feedback that's come in already, and that's already had quite an influence on how the scheme has the first sort of scheme has launched, and with the initial standards, and that continues to evolve, and we'll continue to feed that in. So looking at what we're going to do into the future, so we're obviously going to continue our learning through the pilot, and that's going to sort of further inform the design of the sustainable farming incentive, and indeed all of the environmental land management schemes. And these are all an evolving set of policies that we're doing lots of having lots of discussions. We're feeding in things like, from the pilot, we're listening to what farmers are saying, what stakeholders are saying, and and looking at, and indeed government priorities change, the world has changed over the time that we've been working on this. So we're going to continue to feed that into the work. We're planning to introduce some more standards into the live scheme next year, and I'm hoping that shortly we'll be releasing some more information about those, and are sort of generally tend to continue to improve the schemes and keep that moving forward. So as Louise said, just a reminder that there are lots of different workshops coming up in our newsletter each month. We normally have details of things coming up, and we try to get communications out to you as much as we can where there are opportunities to get involved. We've obviously got our standard learning activities and things that we're doing within the pilot, but there are quite a few opportunities to be involved in some of our sort of practitioner and feasibility groups within the wider scheme. So do look out for those in the communications that come out, because it's really good to have your sort of pilot farming perspective in those as well. And if you've got any feedback at any point, if you do want to send that in, or if you want to share some of your learning journals or any extracts of the your learning journals that you think would be really useful for us to see, then do send them in to us as well at the team. So and I think, just as Louise said, just really want to say thank you. It's really good to be able to work with you all, and have all this interaction, and thank you very much. So I'm going to hand back to Louise now, I think, before we go on to our next section, if that's okay, Louise.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Sam. So I'd like to introduce Martin Lyons, who is the chair of the Nature Friendly Farming Network, and he's going to tell us about the approach that he's taken on his farm and how that has helped him in his farming business. Martin, if I can bring you in, please. Thank you.
Lovely, and thank you very much. And before I start, on behalf of all the other farmers in England, I think there's a thank you to all the pilot farmers. I know sometimes you may feel that your feedback and that isn't getting listened to and that, but it does come through in other meetings I get to sit in. And actually, you lot are doing all the hard work to make the scheme that we're all going to join a lot easier. And I think it's a hats off really to DEFRA and this co-design process, that you lot are going to be involved from the start to the finish in putting the options in the landscape and seeing some of the results. So hopefully the scheme that we do get to roll out in a few years' time, that actually really works for farmers right across England in all the different sizes, shapes and practices. And I know when I did my SFI application a couple of months ago, I found it so simple compared with every other application we've done, with the interactive, with the maps there that click in, you can see what you're doing. And over the hectareage we do, it added up to a reasonable amount of money. And we look forward to the other options hopefully being released fairly soon, and we can stack those in as well. So I farm in Cambridgeshire. We're a family farm of 165 hectares. And we are also rent, and I'm a share farmer. And as a farmer, it is important we run a business, and it's about improving that bottom line. But it's also improving, for me, the biodiversity and carbon of my footprint. So in the past, the focus of what we used to produce was always about food or commodities at the highest possible yield. And that was driven by government and everyone else, with little regard to the environment that that may cause. But as I've understood our soil and our landscape better, and really trying to understand its true productivity, we can produce more from it, and I believe be more profitable and sustainable in what we do. We must remember we don't just produce food on our landscape, and a lot of what we produce isn't actually fed to people. There's other crops and other things we produce. So for me, the focus now is to produce as much as possible, but for the best margin, not always for the yield. I'm looking for profitability, but recognise of all the goods and services the society is asking. And particularly as we go forward with our nature and our climate crisis, public and society are looking for us as farmers to deliver a various range of outputs. And I'm really looking forward to, and I've already started to stack various schemes and public payments together, and also trying to bring in private finance to deliver where I can get a better return, and stack those opportunities for all the goods and services people want. So food production is really important, but food production and nature recovery are not trade-offs. Next slide, please. As farmers, as businesses, maintaining our environment is a core cost to our businesses. And in the past, a lot of that hasn't been recognised. In the pictures on the left, you could call that livestock fencing in sorts. But if we call it environmental protection fencing, we probably get a grant and public will pay towards it. And it'll help buffer off those edges. And we can use those schemes and options to drive, to help us farm in better ways and bring different supported incomes to deliver the things that we need to be doing. Those hedgerows we're growing, on our own farm, we've made them, allowed them to grow bigger and bushier. We put grass margins beside them because we know cropping beside edges are the least productive areas of the field. But it also means I can do all my hedgerow management, and we cut on a 2 to 3 year cycle right into the winter. We usually start post-Christmas, but of course we have some of the fields are wetter. We need to do them a little bit earlier. That helps spread my workload out throughout the year. And we buffer all watercourses. I'm not organic and I use pesticides, but they mustn't be coming into the watercourses because then other people are having to clear up, and we will see a restriction on uses. So where we can, we put buffer, we do on all watercourses, put those buffer zones in, but try not to trim them so often, because every time I start a tractor up, that's probably £50 an hour. And I'd rather leave some because it also creates habitat for biodiversity. Next slide, please. On our own farm, we've really transitioned our farming system. Many people believe that top left-hand picture is the tool of the devil. If you hear some, that plough, actually they can have a role, but we recognised on our own soil that running a plough in the furrow was leaving deep compaction and was causing soil structure problems. So we reduced our tillage to move away from soil, heavy movement of soil, and really worked out how we could greatly reduce our tillage and our herbicide bill, because the less we move the soil, the less weed burdens we found. And we went down to a low till situation to cut away our blackgrass problem, but then we worked out we can introduce the cover crops and direct drill. And it was about building that system up and building the fertility up into our soil. Next slide, please. And because I'm a Cambridgeshire arable farmer, not having livestock, we were able to reintroduce somebody else's livestock onto our farm. And that really helped build our soil health up and the biodiversity in our soil. And it really helped build the fertility up in our soil, and the fertilizers better out the bum than out the bag. The more manures we can use sensibly, the better. And we found this year that because we've been working on this a few years now, we've actually cut our fertilizer use by at least half. And there's 1 or 2 fields we didn't use any artificial nitrogen on and got really good yields out of it. So we're needing to understand how we can drive our fertility and our outputs and using less fossil fuels wherever possible. So it's been a real bonus in transitioning our farm. So I look at our farm and where the most productive bits and the least productive bits are, and how we can put schemes and options in our landscape. So we buffered off all our water courses. Along this picture in the middle, there's a public bridleway that goes through the middle of the farm. We put flower margins beside them. It kept the public out of my crops, but it also demonstrated the stuff we can do and the public really liked them. And they're paying for those. And that really helped me connect to the public in the options I was delivering. And those awkward corners and little unproductive bits, the shaded side of the wood, we could put a range of different options in. The picture on the left just shows how it was. And then the picture on the right, you can just see that it's just buffering off those edges of the fields. And even those small fields, we just sensibly do it, and we can really make the system work better. Next slide, please. And as we've been doing this a number of years and been engaging with scientists and looking at research, there's been a number of papers coming out lately that really demonstrate the benefit of habitats and biodiversity on our farmed landscape. So this is just one of the trials I've been slightly involved with and been watching with great interest, where they actually put habitat and measured the outcomes. A plain field like we normally see in an arable situation, post-harvest, they flail all the hedges and all the ditches and leave no biodiversity, and that's your control. The fields that they put some buffer zones around the outside was treatment 2, and then they worked out that most creepy crawlies travelled between 40 and 60 metres, and at 100 metres was an optimum. So they put them in at approximately 100 metres. If we can go to the next slide, please. And the impact of that biodiversity, eating slugs, eating aphids and pests, have seen tremendous yield benefits. So a net yield benefit by having habitat around the outside of over 16%. And having those strips in fields, we're seeing nearly 18%. So on my farm, we haven't used insecticides for 9 years. I hardly use slug pellets. We're seeing net yield go up and costs go down. And it's trying to understand, how do we work with nature and the free gifts that can give us to improve our productivity and move away from buying some products in. And it's just that journey we're going to take, or I've been taking, and I know many farmers are right across the UK, particularly England, in using schemes to make our landscape work better. Next slide, please. So on our own farm, we've sort of maxed out on what we can do, understanding the science that's behind having more circular system or biodiversity. So we have a 30-metre sprayer. So we've subdivided our bigger fields into 90 and 120-metre blocks, and putting 6-metre flower strips in the middle. Most of the awkward corners we've taken out, not everywhere, but we've tried to sensibly place stuff across our landscape, which gives me a steady, ready income coming in through stewardship. It's taken out my overlaps and unproductive bits, so I'm reducing my inputs and increasing my average yield. And then it's adding yield and benefit across my farm landscape. So it's really having this joined up approach around how do we farm for the future and using public and private finance to maximise our returns for our landscape. So thank you very much, and thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much indeed, Martin. If you could just stay there, just because we may get some questions in the Q&A that you can answer. But I'd like to hand over to our next presenter, who is a farmer in the pilot, and she's going to take you through her experience to date. Kitty?
Hello.
Hi, Kitty. Thank you.
Hi, so I'm Kitty Hamilton. I'm from a family-run farm in East Lincolnshire, and an SFI pilot members. Next slide, please. So we are, sorry, let me just sort out my screen, because there we are. We're a family-run farm, as I said. We've got discrete blocks of land, so we're not ring-fenced. We've got some loams and clays over chalk on the edge of the wold, right down to some heavy marine clays on the marsh. Predominantly arable, mainly combineable crops, plus some sugar beets. On the livestock side, we've got our own herd of suckler cows, and then we do bed and breakfast pigs in straw yards, and bed and breakfast sheep, which are on short-term grass lays and also on stubble turnips over the winter. Got just over 200 hectares of broadleaf woodland, 2 statutory monuments and a registered parks and gardens site. We were in CSS from 2000 to 2010, and then had a 10-year HLS ELS agreement. Next slide, please. Thank you. So our SFI agreement started on the 1st of March this year. We've got 2,200 hectares in the arable and horticultural land standard at the introductory level, and then the same land in the soil standard at the advanced level. Grassland similar, 65 hectares in the improved grassland standard at introductory level with the advanced soils option layered on. 30 hectares of low no input grassland, of which about 25 hectares has got the additional payment and is managed for wetland birds. 210 hectares in the farm woodland standard, with 12.5 hectares of that with the maintenance of new planting option on. 50 kilometres of hedgerow standard at introductory level. We do have watercourses on the farm. It's predominantly drained land, but we haven't gone for the watercourse standard. Like Martin, we do have our ditches buffered, but we've chosen to use those buffer strips to count towards the land we've taken out of production for the arable and horticultural standard. The positives of this scheme for us were the flexibility, a little bit looser than some of the other schemes, which we really liked. We were able to retain habitat from previous schemes, and hopefully you'll see in my latest slides, we're quite proud of some of those habitats that have been in for a while. So it's quite important to us that we could retain and use those. I like the fact that we're contributing to co-design, the close fit to our current and our planned farming methods. So we're able to use those habitats that we've created under previous schemes. And it also, the land standards and the soil standards are just gently nudging us towards the more regenerative system we're looking to move towards. The fact that we can layer the standards and include all the land on the estate mean that this does help us generate a good income. Generally, I've enjoyed engaging with the learning opportunities and that sort of ability to upskill personally and professionally within our organisation. So we'll now move on to some negatives. So here I've got flexibility as a positive and a negative, and it very much feeds into those slides Sam showed us about, I think my experience of the scheme, although I'm obviously on one of the bigger farms, is probably quite typical of lots of people. So that flexibility is appealing. It's also a little bit intimidating because there's that anxiety around, am I doing this right? Am I getting this right? Am I doing enough? Am I doing the right things? And that feeds into my second comment, which is the lack of one-to-one advice and advisors on the ground who can help reassure us and make sure we're on the right track. Financially, yes, this scheme does offer the option of a good income. It's certainly not a replacement for BPS, which I think some people possibly thought it might be before the details were published. So we've done the sums, and our pre-reduction BPS plus our ELS HLS payment, this scheme replaces about 35% of that income. So it's very, very welcome, but we certainly need to find other things to replace the gap that BPS is going to leave. This comment probably relates to the pilot, some of us in the pilot scheme, less so to people in the main scheme. So our start date was late. It was in March when we'd hoped it would be an autumn start date, and we were also notified of the start date after our scheme started. So that made it quite hard to establish some of the options. I did have some challenges with the Learning Journal, but I also gave this talk at Newark, and there was some discussion around the Learning Journal, and now I do feel that I understand what's required in that and feel a little bit more confident about that. We're just going to look at some images now from our farm. So this is a Phacelia plot. So this is some habitat for insects and flowers. We did grow some Phacelia on its own this year. As I said, we were a little bit late getting notice of our scheme starting, so it was a case of using what we had available to us. It is really good habitat for insects though, and it does look very pretty. Again, this is alongside a road. So it's about making our farm look appealing to the public, showing them what they're paying for, just as Martin said. Next one, please. This is some of our stubble turnips. Stubble turnips work well for us. We use them as a cover crop, cheap to establish, provide really good nutrition for our bed and breakfast sheep across the winter, and they count towards our winter bird seed requirement. Next one, please. So here we've got, this is how the majority of our winter wheat was established. So we're running a fairly shallow cultivation here to fit in with our soil standard. Just sort of a bit of a gratuitous video of a nice big tractor, and this plot of land doesn't normally work this well, so it's quite nice to see it. 2 passes here, so one immediately after harvest, and this one is immediately preceding the drill. So if we just pop onto the next video, please. So here is drilling in the adjacent field into the seed bed that we've set up with the quad track. Again, this was running really well in some very favourable conditions, and it's established really nicely. So next one, please. This is some of our grass margins. So they don't all look this good, I have to admit, but these have been in place for just over 20 years now, a lot of them, and we have really seen the floristic diversity increase during that time, and with that the benefits, the invertebrates, and then you've got the birds feeding off the invertebrates. So we really have reaped the benefit of having those in for a long time. Particularly good year for orchids this year, 4 different varieties. Also got a little picture there of our on-farm horse ride. So that's paid access for horse riders. It follows some of the margins, it goes through some of the woodland, and something that I would like to see come into future versions of SFI is paid for access. We had paid for access under both our initial countryside stewardship and our HLS scheme. So we had permissive bridleways, permissive footpaths. Those are a good way to provide a public good and to get people on the farm and see what we're doing. Next one, please. Couple of photos of our livestock. So here we've got some sheep grazing some stubble turnips. We've also got our pigs, our bed and breakfast pigs. Bed and breakfast livestock suit us really well. I think they're quite a nice way to introduce livestock into a rotation if you're wanting to move to a more mixed system, not got the necessity or the complications of breeding animals, and you've got the expertise of the owners. With the pig yard, we're also looking at water management and applying for capital grants for that. So that's managing dirty water and also rainwater collection, both for watering the pigs. Those pigs average 40 litres of water per day per pig. Sorry, 40 litres of water per pig per week. So we're really getting through the water with them, so that would be quite good. We'll also collect rainwater for filling the sprayers. Next one, please. This is some images of our wetland grass, so our very low input grass. So here we're controlling the water levels. We've created some scrapes to keep the water on the fields over the winter and generally through most of the year. Obviously, we've had an exceptionally dry summer, which is when that bottom photograph was taken. So very low stocking densities, a variety of sward heights, and these wetter areas. Next one, please. This is some of our woodland. We've got a variety of quality of woodland, I suppose, on the farm. We've used some of the funding from SFI to refresh our woodland management plan. It does have 5 years left to run, but the impact of ash dieback is such that we are changing our management structures, whereas we would have always favoured retaining ash in the past. We're now obviously looking at having a more mixed matrix in there. And another image from the horse ride there where it goes through some of the woodlands. This is just a little extract. I've created a 3 sides of A4 handbook for our scheme. So this is just quite a quick overview, an aid memoir, if you like, which we can share with our contractors, with our staff, and it just makes sure that we're all staying on track, that everyone knows what areas we need to be putting into these options and what the prescriptions are. Next one, please. Couple of slides to finish. So this is our registered park, or part of our registered parks and garden landscape. So I think most of us would recognise that when we're fortunate enough to be custodians of these really special landscapes, we need to be doing our bit to preserve them, to keep them in good condition. And then if we just move to the last slide, this is not something that was very exciting. This is a small half-hectare field. It sits a little bit separate from the rest of our land. It's across the far side of an old railway line. This field's been effectively abandoned for about 15 years. And it has actually created this really quite special habitat. The plant assemblage isn't the most exciting. Yes, we've got the orchids there. We've also got thistles, brambles, ragwort. But when you go down there, there's such a variety of habitat in there, and it's absolutely teeming with wildlife, lots and lots of birds, lots of evidence of small mammals. And for me, this is quite an inspiring example of how we can create something quite special from something very, very ordinary. We couldn't make money farming this field. You've seen the size of some of our kit. And this is a very unproductive little wet marsh field, quite 2 fields away from the coast. And to me, this is just a really nice reminder that we can use schemes like this to create something of benefit, even in quite an intensively farmed arable landscape. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Kitty. Thank you very much indeed for coming along this evening and giving up your time and doing that. And I know that you're not feeling particularly well this evening, so a huge thanks to you, and please do feel free to leave. But thank you. So what we're going to move on to now is a Q&A session. So we've got Martin here. We may not have Kitty for much longer, but we've got Martin, and you've got the DEFRA team. So if there are any questions on the presentation that you've heard that you'd like the opportunity to ask us, we've got around 20 minutes for questions. So what we're going to do, if we don't mind, we'll take the presentation down for the time being, and then we can see you all. So please feel free to put your cameras on if you'd like to. So there's several ways that you can have a question. You can put a question into the chat and we can pick it up from the chat and answer it, or you can raise a hand if you do want to ask a question. So if you want to raise a hand, if you're logged on a computer there into the Zoom meeting, there is a bar along the bottom, and there is something, a reactions tab. And if you click on the reactions tab, it does say raise hand, and you can raise a hand, and I can see who's raised a hand, and we can take those questions in turn. So just messages on before we begin taking the questions on the presentation. So we are recording the session today, so for those of you that want to listen back, we'll send it out, and for those of you that maybe some people that you know of that weren't able to attend, that work with you, that you'd like to hear back, we will be sending it out for you to listen to, and we'll be sending copies of the slides, so you will be able to have a look at those as well. So if we go to the first hand up, so Paul, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. A question really about who's really buying into this and who's not. It seems to me from your introductory slides, or those from Sam, I can't remember who showed them, that there seems to be a preponderance of pastoral or animal agriculture as opposed to arable in terms of people who are getting involved and picking up on the scheme. I don't know if that's true or not. But if you think about the environmental damage in this country, most of it's about the monoculture and the arable practices that are going on. And I'm just interested to know, if you look at the mix, you know, how much of the arable farming are we addressing in this initiative, as opposed to pastoral?
Paul, and that's a really good question. We've got a range of different farm types in the pilot, and we were really pleased with the coverage that we have. So we've got a wide span from small upland farms right the way through to larger arable farms in the pilot. So we do feel that the pilot is representative. We do have a slide that we can add into the presentation that just shows the different types of farm types that we have in the pilot, just to give you an indication that we have got that range and where they may be in your area. So very happy to include that in the presentation and send it out, so you can have a look at an exact look at the types of farm coverage that we've got. Sam, anything you wanted to add to that?
Thanks, Louise. No, I mean, I think the one thing to note for the pilot was, and as I sort of said in the presentation, that it's that the schemes themselves have been quite evolving over time, and obviously setting the pilot up sort of 18 months ago, there was 18 months work prior to that to get to the point that we could start sending out expressions of interest and applications. So things are going on. But in terms of the scheme development, there are lots of elements within the pilot that we're learning about, about the arable side, about mixed farming, and more specialist livestock. But in terms of how we're building these schemes, it's definitely looking to make sure that there's an offer, an incentive. There are actions that can be done for all farming types, and because we're all going through this change together. The Common Agricultural Policy, we're out of that, and the schemes that came through that. So we're looking at what we can do, and hopefully, it's always difficult to try and find. We've had a number of pilot farmers come to talk to us over this range of events, and we've had different dairy farmers, we've had smaller farmers, large farmers, just trying to get to sort of express the variety of farms that we have got. But the idea with the schemes is that there should be something for everyone.
Don't get me wrong. I mean, I thought Kitty's and Martin's presentation was downright inspiring. I just sit here in rural Suffolk, and I'm surrounded by Luddites who are doing monoculture with big ploughs and with no hedges and nitrogen wash from human sewage over application going into our watercourses, and it's very unpleasant.
No, well, hopefully that as the schemes come on, it will incentivize and inspire more people to come on board.
Yeah.
Thanks, Louise.
We've got, before I move to Sarah, we do have a question in the chat, and that's what has been the most interesting results that we've had so far. So I think I speak on behalf of everybody in all the policy teams in DEFRA in that the pilot has been incredibly useful. It's really incredibly useful to work with all of you to test out how things are working, and some things, as you help pointed to us, don't work in the way that we envisage them work, and it allows us to make those adjustments to make sure that they do work in the live scheme. I think some of the highlights that we've had so far was the application portal, as you heard from Sam, in that we heard back from you when you did make your applications for the pilot that it simply just wasn't fit for purpose, and we needed to make some adjustments to that. And that's where we've really put a lot of effort into streamlining that application portal to make it quicker and easier and to enable you to get your offers. And I think what we're doing now is, for the main live scheme, is that you do get your offers within 2 weeks of application. So that'll be very different to some of the experiences that you've had in the pilot. But it's not just the application portal, it's all the results that we've had in terms of how you're applying the standards. We're doing a piece that's coming up on the costs of the implementation of the standards. So we're going to be talking to you about what it costs, and that's going to be really interesting, because that's going to feed into our work on payment rates and looking at whether we've got those right and what we can do around those. So I think incredibly useful for the pilot, and really pleased that you found the time to take part. If we go to our next hand, Sarah. Oh. Hi, Sarah. Have we lost Sarah?
Hi, no, I'm here. Hi.
Hi, Sarah.
Thanks for that. Thank you, Martin and Kitty, for your presentations. They were really great. Just to say that, contrary to Paul's comments, I personally, as a field vegetable producer, find it extremely cereal centric and extremely grassland centric. And the very idea that the arable and horticulture elements in the soil and land even have the word horticulture in, coming from a field vegetable production perspective, seems a bit ironic, given that we had the 21 soil standard that we as field vegetable producers could actually just about manage to access. The changes to the 22 standard have now prohibit us even accessing that, because the assumption is that everybody owns a drill. And not everybody does own a drill. We transplant all of our crops. Most brassicas in this country are. And the change from the soil standard from a cash crop over winter to a multi-species just annihilated that option for us to even access the 22 standard. So a lot of these learnings and information, although be it that it's being sent in via email, my question is, when is there likely to be a horticulture field vegetable horticulture field cropping sort of engagement webinar session where those within those sectors can actually feed it in and contribute? Because I did notice on the actual demographic of who's engaged, horticulture is, I just think there's probably one more than pigs in there. So I think there is a real desperate need to engage in those sectors, given that we are working with some of the highest classed land in the country. It just seems a bit perverse that soil type isn't being engaged fully.
Thanks, Sarah. That, again, another really good question. So a lot of the learning that we've done in the first year has looked at the standards as a whole, and we've invited pilot farmers from a variety of different backgrounds and holdings to understand how the standards have gone. But I very much take your point that we need to delve into that a bit deeper with particular sectors and understand how that works. And that's very much in our planning now as we move into year 2 as the pilot, to have a look and work with to take some sector-based workshops and take you through the standards and how they've applied. So Sarah, I hope that we'll be coming out with some invites to you soon. Obviously, if it is a workshop, we can't invite everybody, but we'll try and include as many people who are interested to come along, Sarah. And what we're trying to do is, I know we've done virtual workshops, but what we're keen to do as well is get out on farm in year 2. So if there are any of you that would be keen to host us on an on-farm visit, or would like us to come around and have a look, Sarah, great, you've got your hand up, that would be brilliant. We'd very much welcome that. Thanks, Sarah. Timothy.
Thanks. Thanks for the session today, really interesting. 2 things. One, a bit of process. Although there's been improvements with the SFI in terms of being able to sort of manipulate land use, etc., we still got the RLE1 kind of bureaucracy, and it does make it difficult to adapt quickly, particularly when you've got remote sensing errors that RPA will still publish without first consulting you whether or not the change is legitimate. So I think that's still a big issue. I still think we've got the timing over when these things happen as well, because they used to happen just before or just after you've submitted your BPS, often putting you in a rather difficult position. So that was one thing. The other thing was a bit more strategic, which was that, and I understand the conversation that's just happened about horticulture versus whether something's grassland or arable centric, but the sensitivity to different landscapes is really important. And where we are in the uplands in the Pennines, again, the landscape is very different. We're mostly small farms, often under 150 hectares, sometimes 150 acres. Some would say, well, basically you should all sort of conglomerate and all become one big unit, which is absolute nonsense, because that's not the way that farming works here. Now, in terms of trying to incentivize people to come into these schemes, obviously the profits are much more marginal than they are in some other areas. And the default situation is that if farms do fall out of productivity or fall out of farming ownership, there are big issues there around what does that land then get used for. And it either gets used for accommodation land or alternative uses that may even be industrial, which of course can negate all the efforts that are being made under these schemes. And I think that just came out in the conversation about adjacent farms and their practices and how there's spillover in terms of contamination. So I really do think there's something around the payment structure and incentivization that tries to regenerate and reinvigorate upland landscapes. And I don't think we've quite got that down to a T yet.
Thanks, Timothy. Again, I think that's really helpful feedback, particularly. I'll address your 2 points. On your strategic point first, I think that's really helpful feedback, and I know the policy teams are wrestling with it and understand the issue, and are trying to look at the payment structure and the incentivisation, because we know it's an issue and we've heard it's an issue. What we are doing in the pilot is, as I said, we're looking at a piece of work around what it's going to cost about the implementation of the standards. That's going to start with a survey, but we're hoping to dig into that a bit deeper to look at particular farm types and their the costs of implementing the standards, and also whether you've got any ideas about incentivisation and how that could work. So I hope that gives you some reassurance that we do recognise it's an issue, and we are looking into it, and we're really keen to get your views onto, one, what it's cost you to implement the standard and be part of the pilot, and what your ideas would be for taking that forward. I think on your other point in terms of the improvements, glad that you feel that the SFI live scheme application portal is in improvement, but we do acknowledge there are still issues with mapping and RLE ones, and being able to submit those so that they get the land right in the system. And obviously it's something that we working closely with RPA on to make sure that, you know, those don't occur as frequently as they have, but obviously taking back the lessons both from what we've learned in the pilot but also in the live scheme. Sam, is there anything that you wanted to add to that?
Thanks, Louise. No, I don't think so. I think the only other thing, just you know, in terms of sort of perspectives, we always knew that the transition, so as we come out of existing schemes and go into our new schemes, was going to be a really complex one. And you know, and some of our sort of most sensitive habitats, like yourself in the Pennines, and some of these other ones where there are lots of other things going on. And we've had there's a couple of comments in the chat as well, you know, about some of these, you know, it's quite difficult to we've got to transition from our old schemes into our new, and also as we're building the new schemes, get them right. And so the sustainable farming incentive is one of the schemes, one of the 3 schemes that we're working on. So it's not going to be able to cover everything, you know, every sort of optional or type of activity that we can do, because we will obviously have other schemes, other options, other ways of getting them in as well. But what we are trying to do is to get a scheme that we can operate across the country to a certain level, and get as many farmers involved in that and in as many different ways as we can. But we know that there are going to be other areas, so it's about building that picture, and appreciate that we're not giving you very much of a picture at all. I think as pilot farmers, you've seen a lot more than lots of other farmers across the country, because you've been going through that pain and working with us to do that, but it's not, you know, there is a bigger picture out there which we're trying to build for you. So it's about trying to keep that sort of wider perspective.
Thanks, Sam. I can see we've got a couple of hands up. Before I come to those hands, we've just got a couple of questions in the chat. So from Sandra, completely agreeing with Tim around and then making the point about small farms. And I just wanted to reassure you that we are looking at the issue of payment rates. It's something that we've heard on the live scheme about the 3 standards that we've got in the live scheme, and something that we're actively working on with ministers to look at the payment structure of the live SFI scheme and what can be done. Looking at Georgina, I can see you've put a question about your annual declaration. If you could direct message me, if you don't mind, with your SBI, and I will follow that up for you with RPA, Georgina, if that's okay. And if you don't know how to direct message me, please just, if you email the SFI pilot learning email, we'll show that before the end with your details, and we will make sure that we follow that up for you. So if I come to Richard first, because Richard, I don't think you've asked a question. Richard?
Yeah, hiya. It's just a question. We've got our annual declaration that's due end of the month, and I need to have a look at putting some changes through and adjusting some of the grass statuses. Which is the best way to do that? in terms of having a discussion? Is it come back through emailing SFI Pilot Learning, or go to the RPA, or who do I speak to, would be my question.
So that's a good question. So is it in terms of your annual declaration, you want to speak to somebody before you make an amendment? Yeah,
well, basically what I'd like to do is try and remove some improved grassland that isn't improved grassland to low and no input, but I need to speak to somebody about how possible that is and how that fits, and also where we stand with our declaration, being as it's been a drought this year and some things have been an absolute nightmare. So it's really how you all put it all together, because the declaration is just tick a box pretty much. Doesn't really give you a lot of leeway.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. That sounds a complex issue. So what I'd suggest, if you email the SFI Pilot Learning, and if you just say you were on the call this evening and that you've got a query around amendments, and we'll make sure that we get back to you. You will still need to submit your amendment via the process by the RPA, but we can have that discussion with you before you submit it, so you're clear on the process. Yep,
no, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. And then Paul.
Yeah, sorry to be too noisy.
That's all right.
I just have a question about where's the policy vulnerable? Interesting in your graphs that hedgerows were a very popular thing for people.
I think we might have lost Paul.
Have we lost Paul?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. You just dropped out when you were saying hedgerows were popular.
Okay, so hedgerows are very popular. And my question is, how robust is the policy? Because it takes time for the benefits to come through, years, in fact. In the last couple of months, I seem to have picked up from the press that the government is no longer going to fund subsidy around hedgerows. Is that the case? In which case, all of this piloting around hedgerows, which has been so popular, is going to go nowhere.
So I think, Paul, I hope that you didn't pick that up from the press. So I think what we are definitely looking at hedgerows. Hedgerows are an environmental asset on your land, and they can provide lots of environmental outcomes. So it's definitely something that we are looking at and we want to support. It's just the best way that we do that and how we do that through a standard. So we've got lots of learning and lots of feedback from you that's got the hedgerow about what works and what doesn't work, and we've heard very clearly about buffer strips and around the timings of cutting, and we are taking that to try and simplify that and roll that out into the live scheme. So hopefully that gives you some reassurance. So we're taking the messages that we've heard. It may not be in the format that it is in the pilot.
Okay, so all will not be lost, Louise.
All will not be lost, no.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Sam, was there any more questions in the chat that we can answer?
Just looking to see. I think there's quite a few comments in the chat, so which will capture these and build them into our insights as well. Tim has just picked up on the economic evaluation. So yeah, I think that we'll be looking at doing quite a lot of evaluation, I think, of the pilot and of the full schemes as well, in terms of how that's contributing to our overall objectives and what we're trying to do. So I think from a pilot perspective, we're obviously sort of making a start on that at the moment, or on the scheme, but as it builds, we'll be looking to get more out of that.
Okay, thanks, Sam, that's really helpful. There was one question that I did see that we haven't answered right at the top, and I think the question relates to eligibility for the SFI live scheme. So obviously what for the pilot, it was restricted to those that were in receipt of BPS, but I think we are working on widening the eligibility for future rounds of the live scheme. So hopefully that will enable anybody that hasn't been eligible for BPS that could come into the live scheme and deliver those environmental benefits and those standards that's in that scheme. Martin.
Thank you. I just want to say it's so important all the farmers feed in the problems they're seeing. This is such a complicated thing. They've got the pilot going, they've got the SFI, they're trying to do stewardship. we need to make this right. And you as pilot farmers, your input is so important to help DEFRA join this together and really make a scheme work. Because we know it's blooming complicated, and we're all in different farm businesses and sizes, and we all matter. And it's kind of how do they make a scheme work? And I'd also say, don't all believe what you read in the press. There's lots of stories going around what's happening to Elm and other things. Let's just wait and see what comes out in the new year and how we move forward. I'm hopeful it's going to be a lot better than what the press, or in fact, I'm sure it's going to be a lot better than what the press doomsters are trying to say about it, because we actually need to drive that funding that was in the CAP back onto farms to help them deliver and get reward for their assets they have.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Martin. And we can only reiterate that point. Thank you for being involved in the pilot, and do continue to tell us what we can improve, but also what's working for you, because we want to build that into the live scheme as well. If it's working and it's working well, we need to know that as well. So I think we're almost at time and ready to move into the regional groups. I have had a question about this. So we do learning activities that I know some of you that have been along to in some of the workshops. We've got a question about, can we record the workshops? So I'll definitely take that away and have a discussion with my team about whether we could record the workshops and share those on SharePoint if anybody of you were interested and wanted to add the points onto that. Excuse me. So I think we've got around half an hour now to go into our breakout sessions, which is an opportunity for you to meet other farmers that's in the region that you're in. So you'll get an opportunity to introduce yourself, tell a little bit about your farm and the standards that you've got in the pilot, what's working well and what's a challenge. So you will have somebody from DEFRA in that group that will facilitate and make sure that you all got the opportunity to come in. So how are the sessions going to work? So we're going to break out into groups, and you can see the map. So there'll be one for the Northeast, the Northwest, the Yorkshire and Humber, East Midlands, West Midlands, East of England, Southeast and Southwest. So just before I say we start the session, you'll be asked to join a group. So you will see a pop-up, and you will be able to select the group, and if you click on the blue button join, that will take you to the group, and you'll automatically be taken there and see everybody else that's in the group. If you can't join the group, please don't worry. We've got DEFRA officials on hand that will be able to put you into the group that you want to go in, so don't worry. There will be around 10 to 15 people in each group, so you'll each get around 2 minutes to introduce yourselves and tell us about what's working and what your challenges are in your farm. But this is an opportunity for you to unmute and catch up with other farmers. We will come back to the session right at the end because we've got a feedback poll for you. So Jamie, if we can begin the breakout sessions, please. Back, I think we have got most people back. I am sorry if the discussions were cut short. We did have a bit longer than we did the in the morning session that we ran. So I do hope you enjoyed that session, enjoyed meeting the farmers. I definitely enjoyed meeting the ones in my group and hearing your concerns, but also hearing what you think's working well. So thank you for giving up your evening and coming along to talk to us this evening. It's greatly appreciated. My thanks in particular to Martin and Kitty for coming along and giving those wonderful presentations. You will be able to see there is a poll on the screen now. So if please do take a moment to give us some feedback on whether you enjoyed today's session, because it will help shape what we do and the other webinars and offers that we have in terms of learning activities and where we go next with them. So please do take the time to fill in that poll. Hopefully you can see it and it's popped up on your screen. Thanks to the team as well, because my team have given up their evening to come along and to spend it with you and to talk to you, which we enjoy doing, but thank you for them as well. So I think, Sam, Liz, was there anything else I needed to cover?
No, I think we're there, Louise. Thank you very much. And yeah, thanks. Really good to see everybody. Even though we're virtually, it's still good to see you all face to face and have that time to talk to you all. Excellent, brilliant. And for those of you that did want to get in touch with us, that's our email address, and please do feel free to contact us. I know there's a couple of people got in touch with us in the chat, and we will be following those up. We've took a copy of the chat today, so that if there's any queries, we'll make sure we follow those up. But if you do want to get in touch with us,
please do use the email address. That's great. Well, I wish everybody a good evening. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Oh, my.
Does the poll need to be